Welcome to the Other Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana. It is an eventful day yet again to talk about sports in the state of Indiana. We've got 5 segments to talk about here today. The Pacers are going to Paris. They will play the Spurs twice. While there, we're going to talk about Purdue men's basketball. They're going to travel, at least they're going to play host to Michigan this Friday. They just lost to Ohio State, and conversely, Indiana just lost to Northwestern and plays host to Maryland on Sunday. We'll talk about those two teams. We're going to go back to the Indianapolis Colts for the first time in a while. We're going to talk about their opponents in 2025 and maybe where they are most likely to have success, if at all, during the season. And then we're going to preview both conference championship games, the AFC Championship game, the NFC Championship game. We're going to talk about each of them. You've got Bills, Chiefs, you have Commanders, Eagles. It's going to be a fantastic weekend of football and a fantastic weekend of Indiana sports. And exactly where we're going to start is going to be the Indiana Pacers. And the question around them right now is whether or not they're going to be able to maintain their win streak in Paris, because the Pacers are the team following Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs to Paris, France, to play a pair of games over there. 2 p.m. Thursday, January 23 on NBA TV. We have Pacers versus Spurs in Paris. We'll play again on Sunday, I believe, at noon on ESPN. This is Wembanyama in his home country. The Pacers, by all accounts, are in foreign territory. It's not just the fact that it's a different country, which is obviously a very big deal, but also the fact that this is where many of the Wembanyama fans are going to be sourced from globally. So the Pacers are going into another country where they are not going to be the team that is, favored, or the team that is enjoyed the most out of the two. They're going to face the Spurs again in France, obviously still Paris, in just a couple days. But today, this episode is being recorded early Thursday morning, 2 p.m. today. The Pacers go to Paris, or they're in Paris already. They're going to play the Spurs. These are the only 2 games the Pacers will play against the Spurs all year long, and both of them are occurring, again, overseas. So that's going to be an interesting force at play here. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, these 2 games out of the 82 is not going to be that consequential, but again, the Pacers don't play Wembanyama that often. They're going to play him twice. They're going to play him back-to-back, and they're going to play him in France. The Pacers have not won in San Antonio in the Wemby era, and that will continue because they're not going to be playing in San Antonio this year. So let's look at the Spurs. Both of these teams go into France. The Spurs are 19-22. They're 12th in the West. They're a game and a half back from the play-in tournament, or at least that range of the standings. They are on a 3-game losing streak. They lost to Memphis twice at home, and then they went to Miami and lost there amidst all the Jimmy Butler drama. None of those games were particularly close. So the Spurs right now are objectively playing bad basketball. Again, 3-game losing streak. They're 19-22, 12th in the West, and that losing streak really dropped them out of play-in range. They've been huddling around the 9 or 10 range for most of the season, but they dropped a few games in a row here, and now they're back to 12th in the West. So obviously there's still plenty of time. We're only about halfway through the season, but it seems to be that the Spurs are a play-in team at best. And that's what the Pacers are going to be tasked with, as San Antonio is still kind of, on a macro scale, figuring themselves out. They're still trying to figure out how they're going to build around Wembanyama. It's likely another lottery year for the Spurs. If it's not, then they're in the play-in tournament, and we'll see what happens there. But regardless, this is Wembanyama's team, and they're trying to make it his team and sort of supplement him with pieces through the draft or free agency or whatever else. This is still a rebuilding Spurs team. This is still a Spurs team that's trying to figure itself out. And even if they end up in the play-in tournament and play their way into the playoffs, this is by no means a Spurs team that's capable of much more than that on a consistent basis right now. So the question is, how do they win games? Because they have 19 of them. They win just under half of their games, right, despite being a team like I just described that's still figuring themselves out as it rebuilds. Well, of course, their wins over playoff teams, which I'm going to constitute as quality wins, come by way of Victor Wembanyama. He is the key across the board and the key to defending the Spurs is going to start with defending Wembanyama down low. He's a generational talent. He's capable of taking over, and when he does, he really gives his team a chance to win against most teams in the NBA. Again, those quality wins, those wins against playoff teams, they come via Victor Wembanyama showing out and taking over. San Antonio, to me, hasn't truly outright won a game since January 3rd. They beat the Lakers in their first game back, which I think is a pretty significant asterisk. Remember, there was all the wildfires in LA. Lakers take a pause. Clippers do as well from playing basketball. And then when the Lakers come back, the Spurs managed to get a win there. Wemby had 23-8, good performance, but still, I consider there to be an asterisk on that win. Outside of that, we go back to New Year's Eve, right? And that's where they outlasted the Nuggets. Victor Wembanyama had 35. Great example. The Nuggets, a playoff team. They will be there in the West. That's a quality win for the Spurs. And Wembanyama scored over 30 and really saved the game on defense in the end. Remember, in that game, Nikola Jokic put up a final shot, and it was blocked by Wembanyama down in the final minutes there. So Wembanyama is fundamentally the lifeblood, the anchor of the San Antonio Spurs. And if he is off, then the team's going to lose. Because if he's off, then this is just the same Spurs team that finished at the back of the league the year that they drafted him. So across the board, Victor Wembanyama, if he decides to, in France, and this is a perfect spot for this to happen, where in France he takes over and he puts up 30 plus and ends up beating the Pacers, that could totally happen at least once. And that would partially be acceptable, but we want to avoid that. So the question then is, how can we counteract Victor Wembanyama? Last year, these two teams played, it was in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and the Pacers put up 152 points. Now, that was a long, long time ago, okay? That was before the Pascal Siakam transaction. Buddy Hield and Bruce Brown both played in that game, right? Those are names that really ring some bells from a long time ago. This was a long time ago, and this is the last time the Pacers beat the Spurs. So this was November of 2023, right? Long, long time ago, and that speaks, to how the Pacers have struggled against Wembanyama and defending him most of the time, and also just how long it's been since these two teams have played. Last time the Pacers put up 152. Wembanyama is unlike any player this team has faced so far, and any team or any player this team will play ever. Wembanyama there's no comparison, right? He's nearly an alien. No one plays like him. No one looks like him. No one's built like him. No one is Victor Wembanyama in the way that he is himself. So you have to hold your ground on defense. Now, that's going to be difficult because fundamentally the Pacers don't really have a big that they just throw down low and keep down low. The only example I could think of would be Thomas Bryant, and I don't think that he's necessarily going to be the guy that is going to be able to stand his ground in the best ways against Wembanyama. So that's partially why the Pacers have struggled so much is, sure, the Pacers have forwards and the Pacers have centers, but Wembanyama is just different, and there's no one that's really built to defend someone like him. Granted, I can't think of very many humans that fit that bill, but still, the Pacers, I think, compared to the rest of the league, at least compared to the rest of the playoff teams, don't quite have the same ability to defend him specifically as maybe some other teams would. So, yeah, he's young. Yeah, he has weaknesses and flaws, but Wembanyama matches up well with the Pacers, and that makes the defensive side of the basketball a little bit of a concern for Indiana. Now, that means that you're just going to have to score on the other end, because, again, the last time the Pacers beat the Spurs, they ended up scoring over 150, which is ridiculous, and we shouldn't expect the Pacers to shoot that well, play that well, score that much in this game offensively. But it's time for the backcourt to shine, and it's time for the team to shoot well, right? Wembanyama is going to be the best player down low. If there's really two areas to a basketball court. There's the front court and the back court, right? You've got to win at least one of them to win a game, most likely. If your best player, if the other team is performing better on both ends of the floor on offense compared to you, it's probably game over. Wembanyama is going to take over the blocks. He's going to be the best player in existence down low. He's going to have some putbacks. He's going to have some second chance points. Wembanyama is going to dominate the blocks. So it's time for the backcourt to shine, right? It's time for the Pacers to shoot well, to play well from the field. Turner has been hot. Tyrese Halliburton has been playing consistently well as well. The Pacers are going to have to shoot well and often from the field and really take the defensive pressure off the front court, because if the stat here is points per possession, right? If you tell the front court defense, if you tell them how many points the Spurs must be limited to per possession, And if you continue to increase that number where you say, you know what, you can allow, I'm making up numbers, but 1.6 points per possession and we would still win. That feels a whole lot better than saying you need to be defending at such a high level that it's 0.8 points per possession. And again, I'm making up numbers there. But the point is, the backcourt scoring on offense is going to relieve pressure on the front court defense and allow Wembanyama scoring to be a bit more acceptable every possession, every quarter, and throughout the game, right? So it's time for the backcourt to shine. It's time for this team to shoot well offensively, because I almost think that Wembanyama, you're not going to be able to stop him. You're not going to be able to truly limit him. You're just going to have to try to restrict him enough to where your backcourt can do the rest. And if the backcourt's scoring 152, then the Pacers will have no problem in this game, in my opinion, because the Spurs really don't have that much talent outside of Wembanyama. That's just going to be the question. Can you contain Wembanyama enough to allow the backcourt to shine and score enough to outpace the Spurs both games? And conversely, how much pressure is going to be on each side of the floor, right? Is it the backcourt offense or the front court defense? Who's going to have to do most of the heavy lifting? Because one of them has to be really clicking, right? And it's going to take both, most likely, to beat Wembanyama and the Spurs twice. The other question there is who's going to be on Wembanyama. The name that comes to mind at first is probably Pascal Siakam. How much are they going to be able to do one-on-one? It's probably going to take two to fully limit Wembanyama the way you would like to. But again, it's time for the backcourt to shine, it's time for the team to shoot well, and it's time for the frontcourt defense to really hone in on one player in a way that they haven't necessarily had to this level at all throughout this season. So score in the backcourt, run up the score as much as you can, and contain Wembanyama. And the combination of those two, if they balance, then the Pacers will win twice. If they don't, if the backcourt's not scoring enough, or if Wembanyama is ravaging the frontcourt a bit too much, that's where things start to tip in favor of the Spurs, and that's where you end up taking losses in Paris. I think that losing once is totally okay, 100%. The Pacers are better than the Spurs. That's just a true fact. Look at the standings, look at their records, look at recent play as well. The Pacers are 8-1 in 2025. The Pacers are playing like a better team than the San Antonio Spurs right now. I think they should not be swept by the Spurs. However, in France, in Paris, it's Victor Wembanyama, it's overseas. First of all, it's overseas at all, but then it's overseas against a generational talent, young player playing in his home country. It will be difficult. And especially considering the fact that the Spurs match up pretty well with the Pacers, it's acceptable if the Pacers drop one of these games. I'm totally okay with that. Let's see the Pacers go 1-1 or 2-0 this weekend, and that would make me feel great about the Pacers moving forward. They're fifth in the East. They're one game behind Milwaukee and a game and a half ahead of Atlanta. So they're squarely right there, about a game and a half in fifth, looking to push up to to fourth, looking not to fall back to sixth. So there's an easy stretch of the schedule coming up. We got the Spurs twice, but then there's the Pistons and the Hawks and the Jazz. So there's a lot of opportunities for the Pacers to pick up some wins and a lot of opportunities simultaneously for the Bucks to pick up some losses. What we're looking forward to is the question of whether or not the Pacers can surpass and stay ahead of Milwaukee, because they've surpassed Milwaukee multiple times this season. They have 2 losses to the Bucks. Let's see if the Pacers can fully surpass Milwaukee and move forward on their climb to reach the Knicks at the 3 seed. But first, the Pacers are going to Paris. They're going to play San Antonio. Wembanyama may be uncontainable, but if you can contain him, automatically increases your chances of winning dramatically. The Pacers have the means to win. Despite these matchup weaknesses, they have the roster across the board. They have the roster composition to win. They're 8-1 in 2025 and climbing. And like I said, I could see a loss occurring in one of these 2 games. I would be okay with that. 2 losses would make me feel a bit concerned. 2 wins would make me feel absolutely fantastic, as we've been feeling for the majority of this calendar year. The backcourt has to score. The front court has to lock in on Wembanyama on defense. And the Pacers are going to do their best to win these games in Paris. But we get some national TV games, right? We get some games in the middle of the day this week and weekend. Very excited to watch them play out. We will recap both of these games next Monday. We'll have plenty to talk about each of them. Can't wait to watch it all play out. Go Pacers, and we will see how it goes. All right, let's talk about Purdue. We're going to stay in the sport of basketball. Purdue, they just took a loss to Ohio State. Will they be able to bounce back against Michigan at home on national television this Friday? Purdue, like I said, they took a loss at home for the first time in 500,000 games. I'm not sure what the number is, but Ohio State 73-70 manages to slip past the Boilermakers. And now they're going to stay at home. They're going to take on number 21 Michigan in Mackey Arena, and that's the battle for control of second place in the Big Ten. Let's talk about this Ohio State loss first. Ohio State really put their best effort on the floor on the road following a 3-game skid. So Ohio State on a 3-game losing streak, coming to Mackey Arena, and they put their best basketball on the floor. And it felt like Purdue didn't quite have the manpower across the floor to keep up. Micah Parrish went off. Purdue shot poorly. They were again under 50% from the field. It wasn't a bad game, all things considered, but there really wasn't enough intensity to outpace IU, and I partially want to blame that on the scheduling. They're coming off the West Coast swing. Ohio State was hungry for a win. Purdue played well. This loss is acceptable. It's disappointing, but it's acceptable, and it's acceptable because when you look at the schedule and the context of this game, you realize how difficult this game would have been to win. Yes, you're at home, and I don't want to blame this on the Big Ten. I don't want to blame this on the schedule makers. I'm not blaming the loss on the conference or anyone that works for it, because really they did the best they could, right? Obviously, you're trying to limit travel by putting those West Coast games together, right? Oregon plays Washington on the road, Purdue plays Oregon and Washington on the road in the same week. When USC and UCLA come here, they'll play Purdue and IU in the same week, Illinois, Northwestern. They'll try to get as many of those games through in a swing as possible. But this is, in some ways, a schedule loss, right? Because Purdue is not used to having to go that far away for 2 conference games and then come back home and play a team like Ohio State that all of a sudden starts to jumpstart. And of course, if Purdue's shooting poorly, that's on them. But again, there's wear and tear. It didn't feel like they had the intensity and the manpower to keep up with Ohio State, which is not typically an issue that you see with Purdue. And I think that has something to do with just how much they've been traveling in the last few weeks. So now they have a bit of a homestand, right? They just played Ohio State. They'll play Michigan at home. We'll talk about that game next week on the 31st. They'll play IU for the first time. So Purdue has some time at home, or at least a time in their home state, which is going to allow them to kind of get back in a groove. But they picked up 2 wins on the West Coast swing. They picked up a big one on the road against a ranked team in Oregon. They go out there, pick up a couple wins, come back, and suffer the consequences. Ohio State, again, was hungry for a win. They put their best basketball on the floor and really just showed how deep the Big Ten can be, because Ohio State, not nearly one of the top teams in the conference, but when on their best day, playing their best basketball, they were able to beat one of the top teams in the conference that I would consider to be still contending for a Big Ten championship. It's a disappointing loss, but Purdue played well, shot poorly. Again, intensity, manpower, they just didn't have what they needed to have to beat Ohio State, and I think part of that has to do with where this Ohio State game fell on the schedule. Let's talk about the Michigan game. Michigan is 14-4. They're 6-1 in the Big Ten. That places them second. They're 1 game between Michigan State and Purdue. So really they're where Purdue was last week before this Ohio State game, where Michigan State's leading the Big Ten. They're undefeated. They're, I believe, 7-0. Purdue is now has 2 losses in the Big Ten. So Michigan's right there in the middle. If they lose, then they're slipping back past second place, and they really are giving Michigan State a lead. If they win, then similar to where Purdue would have been last week, if they'd beaten Ohio State, they'd still be a game back, just hounding Michigan, waiting for Michigan to drop a game here or there. Again, Michigan's a game between Michigan State and Purdue. 14-4, 6-1, second in the Big Ten. They're 3-1 against the top 25. So this is a legitimate team in Michigan. All right. Sometimes there's teams at the top. Indiana's way higher in the Big Ten standings than they will end up being by the end of the season. But you've got teams up there that maybe have had some easier conference schedules. Michigan's a legit team. 3-1 against the top 25. That is a much better percentage than Purdue has at the moment. Recently, they blew out Washington. They had an overtime loss to Minnesota, and then an overtime win over Northwestern. So Michigan has been shaky as of recently. They were undefeated in the Big Ten. They were right up there, tied with Michigan State. And then many of you know about that overtime loss to Minnesota on the road that dropped them just a game below. So Michigan, again, 3-1 against the top 25. Very considerably strong team in the Big Ten, but has been shaky recently with those losses, or with that loss to Minnesota and with that just narrow win over Northwestern. very fast start to the year and a shaky decline recently. Now, the number one quality, the number one trait that Michigan harbors is a pair of dominant centers. They have 2 7-footers that dominate the front court. You've got Vladislav Golden, you've got Danny Wolf. Golden averages 16 and 6. Wolf averages 12 and 10. He's averaging a double-double, which is ridiculous, which really makes this game in the front court Trakoff and Wren against the world, right? Because Trakoff and Wren, for the most part, down low has been on his own. We haven't quite seen the production from Caleb Furst that we maybe would want to. And there's really not another big man down there for Purdue, now that Zach Edey is gone, that can pair with Trakoff and Wren to take on some of these combinations. So it's 2 centers. So either they're both going to be on the floor and Trakoff and Wren is overwhelmed, or if they're being subbed out and there's only one of them on the floor at a time, then there's constant fresh legs, and TKR is always going to be the slightly more worn-down player in the front court, and he's really all alone. TKR is down there on that part of the floor. Obviously, Purdue has people they can sub in to that position, but for the most part, Trakoff and Wren is the only truly consistently productive player in the front court across the board. He beat out Biddle with no issue. We're talking about Oregon center Nate Biddle. Trakoff and Wren, in terms of the front court play, dominated Nate Biddle. No issues there. But will he succeed against Michigan when there's 2 of them? And again, it doesn't matter. It's an advantage for Michigan whether they're both on the floor or only one of them is on the floor at a time between Golden and Wolf. So Trakoff and Wren against the world down low, and this is a similar conversation to what we're having about the Pacers as they play the Spurs, is that the shooting has to improve because Purdue has shot poorly recently. Again, they were under 50% from the field against Ohio State. They were under 50% from the field, I believe, both times against Washington and Oregon. And especially knowing that Trakoff and Wren is going to be facing an uphill battle, Purdue is going to have to shoot well in this game at home. Get the crowd behind you, get some shots up early, get some shots to fall early. They've been slumping recently, especially from 3. Some terrible numbers from the 3-point line for Purdue recently. It's been permissible because Trakoff and Wren has kept the team afloat down low, and they're playing some inferior opponents. But in the Pacific time zone, it was permissible, right? Playing Oregon, playing Washington. But now in Mackey, it's not so much as an acceptable of a failure because, again, you're in your own building. You're not time zones away, right? This is a position where Purdue should be able to shoot well, play well against a ranked team and against a team technically better than you in terms of the Big Ten standings. If Trakoff and Wren is going to be overwhelmed by Golden and Wolf, then the backcourt shooting is going to have to improve from Purdue, similar to the conversation we're having about the Pacers. This, to me, is a must-win game. Purdue's in 3rd place. This would be their 3rd conference loss. That's just 1 conference loss above where IU is at this moment. That loss to Penn State is really hurting Purdue at the moment. So they lost to Penn State. They lost to Ohio State. Those are 2 unranked teams below them. Purdue still has some tough games left to go, right? Michigan is a great example. IU, I suppose, is always a difficult game. Michigan State will be difficult. Purdue plays Illinois at the end of the year. Purdue has more ranked opponents that they're going to have to play throughout the schedule, and so far they've been losing to teams that are arguably inferior to them and below them in the Big Ten standings, below them in just about every metric across the board. So to stay in contention for the regular season title, this is, to me, a must-win game at home because there's maybe 12 games left in the season. If they lose, they'd be 3 games behind Michigan State. And yeah, they still play Michigan State, and there's plenty of time in between then for teams to win and lose and for things to ebb and flow. But if Purdue's looking for another regular season Big Ten title, this is a must-win game to me at home against a ranked team in Michigan. Again, it's Trakoff and Wren versus a pair of centers. It's an uphill battle in the front court for the Boilermakers, so the backcourt's going to have to pick up that slack. Braden Smith, it's a great time for Braden Smith takeover game where he drops 30+, and all the Instagram posts just have his face on it, and Braden Smith really takes over and beats this team on his own. But whether it's Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, CJ Cox, this team is going to need to have shooters shoot from the backcourt, from around the 3-point line, from the field as a whole. This is the time for those guards like Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer to really shine as we've seen them do throughout this season at different points. It's an uphill battle for TKR down low. Pick up the slack in the backcourt, start hot, win the crowd, and keep it. That was the big problem against Ohio State. Purdue at home, they started with a lead, right? They had the crowd at their backs, of course, But Ohio State started to creep back into it, and at that point, Purdue just really, there was nothing they could do. And yeah, they kept it close, but late in that game, Ohio State put themselves in the position to have the advantage in late possessions, and they ended up parlaying that into a win. So start hot, win the crowd, and keep the lead. Maintain an 8-point lead. Treat winning by 8 as a tie game, right? Where you got to have the intensity and you've got to have the urgency to appreciate that 8-point lead and stay ahead by 2 possessions, 3 possessions, whatever the number may be. That's what we're going to need to see if Purdue's going to win at home against Michigan and not lose a second game at home in 500,000 games. Stay in contention for Big Ten regular season title. This is a massive game in the Big Ten for the Purdue Boilermakers as they look to stay in contention for Big Ten regular season title. Again, it's going to be an uphill battle in the front court. The backcourt's got to pick up the slack. We'll see how it goes. I'm very excited to watch it all play out this Friday. Okay, let's talk about the other at least the other major college basketball team in Indiana. IU, they just lost a game last night to Northwestern. It was an interesting watch. The question is, can they bounce back against Maryland on national television on Sunday? It's a very similar framework to the question we asked about Purdue, right? Both teams play on national television this weekend. Purdue is on Fox on Friday night. On Sunday in the early afternoon on CBS is when IU takes on Maryland. So overall, right, IU just lost to Northwestern on the road, 79-70 last night. They are now 14-6, 5-4 in the Big Ten. That puts them at 7th or 8th, middle of the pack there. They lost to Northwestern last night. Let's talk about that loss first, because there's some thoughts that I have there, and then we'll preview the Maryland game. IU lost 79-70 in this game, and there's really 2 reasons for this loss, in my opinion. The first one, number one, and if you watch this game, you very well notice this, is poor perimeter defense from the Hoosiers. Tyberry off the bench hit 7 threes. He scored 23 points total. Leach had 3 triples as well. The team, Northwestern, shot 48% from 3, primarily to me because of IU's lapses on defense. And the reason why this is so concerning is because Northwestern's not a good shooting team. They don't shoot well from the field. They don't shoot well from 3. This is not their identity. They've been losing games because they can't hit open shots. And Northwestern just had far too much space to shoot, and it's props to them for creating that space and giving Tyberry, creating space for him around the three-point line to get some shots up. But across the board, Northwestern, again, had way too much space to shoot. The main mismatch was Tyberry and Mackenzie Mbako, where Northwestern was scheming Tyberry open, and Mackenzie Mbako was just fooled by that, or at least beat by that, every single time. And every single time you would see Tyberry pull up from 3, and he hits another one, ended up with 7 and 23 points. But the flip side of that is when Woodson and IU, this coaching staff, really realized that Mbako was getting fried by Tyberry around the perimeter, they bring in Anthony Leal, and still there's just not much of a fix. There wasn't much of a remedy for Tyberry around the perimeter, which is scary because Tyberry doesn't even start for the Wildcats, right? This is a Northwestern team that's bad. They were 2-5. I suppose they're now 3-5 in the Big Ten. They're turning things around, right? They nearly knocked off Michigan just the other day, but Northwestern, they've been playing well. This isn't a great team in the Big Ten, and IU really struggled to limit their shooters. Yes, Northwestern had a great game, but IU had a moment where they could have pulled away. They didn't really take advantage of the Wildcat cold stretch in the end of the first half. If this game is played in quarters, it'd be the second quarter almost to a T. From 9:35 minutes left in the first half to the end of the first half, Northwestern didn't hit a field goal, right? They ended the half with just 25 points. That period of time in the second half of the first half, right, in that final 9 minutes of the first half, that should be when IU pulls away. And I don't mean to just compare IU and Purdue, but I think it's important to note, right, that if Purdue was in this situation, that's when they're pulling away and the game's over, right? Braden Smith is scoring, Trey Coffin-Wright is scoring, Fletcher Loyer is scoring. It doesn't matter. Somebody is scoring, and they're pulling away in that moment. And that's just not what happens. And at the end of the first half, the score was 31-25. But again, Northwestern had 25 at the end of the first half, and IU could not pull away. It was turnovers. It was poor shooting. They couldn't hit shots themselves. IU really didn't create separation between themselves and a theoretically inferior opponent. factually, they just let Northwestern hang around. And Northwestern, of course, again, this is the Big Ten on the road. The home team in the Big Ten, eventually, this game's about scoring runs. And that team at home in the Big Ten is eventually going to have one. And they're eventually going to turn things around, and they're eventually going to get hot. Now, Northwestern got way hotter than any team IU has seen in conference play so far, outside of maybe Illinois. But Northwestern started a pop at home. The crowd got behind them. They had some wind in their sails. And sure, it's okay to maybe be beat in a couple minutes span when that run is occurring, but IU really couldn't stop those 14-2, 10-0 scoring runs from occurring. And again, it's an ebb and a flow. IU is going to have a 10-0 scoring run, and they did in the second half. But none of that should have been necessary because they should have been in a position where at the end of the first half, in that final 9 minutes, they're pulling away and go into halftime leading by 20 because Northwestern only has 25 points in the game across the board and hadn't scored a field goal in almost half of the first half. They let Northwestern hang around, and look what happened. It's a 9-point loss as they get hot in the second half. And what would it be? If they scored 73, then if they scored 79, actually, then it would be, I'm quick math, but like 20, 54, something like that points, 50 points in the second half. Yeah, they scored 25 in the first. That should be when IU leads by 20, and sure, maybe Northwestern pops in the second half, but it shouldn't be enough for them to beat IU. IU, again, just let them hang around, and that was a problem to me, and that is something that we worried about at the beginning of the season, where you have games against teams like UNC Greensboro or Sam Houston, and IU at home in Assembly Hall isn't putting these teams away quick enough. And they beat UNC Greensboro by around 10, right? Just around double digits, 11-9, whatever it was. That's just not enough. They have to be putting those inferior opponents away quicker. And we talked about at that time how that might be an issue in the future. And look where we are now. Northwestern, much better than UNC Greensboro, but still an inferior opponent in the Big Ten. Sure, you're on the road, but if Northwestern is shooting that poorly in the first half, and they're, again, not that impressive of a basketball team on most nights, if they're shooting that poorly, that's when Indiana needs to pull away and put them away. And they just didn't do either of those things. Northwestern hangs around. They're at home. Second half, it's a new game, down by 6. They get hot, and next thing you know, it's game over, and the Wildcats have won. So it's a great win for Northwestern, but a very unfortunate turn of events this season for the Hoosiers. A few bright spots from the game. We're starting to see some consistency. Amar Ballo remains consistent down low. He's been the number one most consistent player on the season for the Hoosiers. He had 15 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists last night. Great numbers from him down low once again. Luke Goody now has strung together a pair of strong showings. He played well against Ohio State, that overtime win, and 14 points in this game against Northwestern, 5 for 8 from the field, 4 for 5 from 3. Theoretically, this means we have one in the backcourt and one in the front court. Amar Ballo in the front court dominating, Luke Goody in the backcourt dominated. Malik Reneau is back, so maybe that relieves some pressure off of Luke Goody eventually. But really, IU has struggled to find a shooter in the backcourt that can really take over games. And Luke Goody certainly kept IU in this one. I think without a few of those clutch threes, he ended up having 4 of them. IU is not going to be in the same position to beat Northwestern. One in the backcourt, that's Luke Goody. One in the front court, definitely, that's Amar Ballo. Those are the bright spots that I saw from a consistency perspective, where now 2 games in a row at least, both of these players are performing well. Like I said, Malik Reneau is back. He didn't play much as they work him back into the lineup. He played for 10 minutes. He had 2 points, so he showed up, right? And that jersey number showed up in this game, and that was encouraging enough and a good sign to me for sure. Maybe this game goes differently if he is a starter and fully playing, but we're working him back in after that right knee injury, which is, of course, a very significant injury. I honestly was surprised when I saw him. I didn't know he would be back. I didn't know he would be back this early, especially when that injury occurred. But Reneau is in a position now where they're working him back into the lineup, and IU has a very, very tough stretch of games coming up. They play Maryland, Purdue, and then 3 more ranked opponents all in a row. It's a difficult stretch of the schedule for IU. They're going to need them to be at full strength. We'll see how working Reneau back into the lineup changes things for the Hoosiers across the board. A tough loss against Northwestern, but a loss nonetheless. the Maryland game is coming up Sunday at noon on CBS in Assembly Hall. Yet another national TV Hoosiers basketball game. This one happening at Assembly Hall. Maryland recently is coming off a narrow win over Nebraska and an overtime loss to Northwestern. So Northwestern has been in some real close games recently, right? And we've talked about them a couple times here. They beat Maryland in overtime. They lose to Michigan in overtime. And then they, of course, win this close one against IU. Northwestern, a plucky, likable team, in my opinion, in the Big Ten. Maryland's going to play number 17 Illinois tonight on the road. So before they play IU, they still have another game in between when we'll speak again. Number 17 Illinois tonight on the road. We'll see how that game goes. That will certainly dictate in some ways what this game looks like on Sunday. But this Maryland team is 14-5, 4-4, 8th in Big Ten play. Very similar to the Hoosiers optically. They're a good team. They have good players across the floor. This is a winnable game for the Hoosiers, all right? This is an opponent in your range of the Big Ten standings that you catch at home. So this should be a redemption opportunity for the Hoosiers because, again, this is a team similar to your level in the Big Ten standings, and we'll see how Maryland and Indiana's seasons turn out and how things shake out at the end of the year. But right now it appears, optically, that Maryland's a team about similar to your level. They have good players across the floor. IU is at least trying to have good players across the floor. At home, this is a winnable game, and I hope that IU is capable of coming away from this one with a win. This would be a fantastic position to have redemption for the Hoosiers, and I'm very interested to see if that's what actually occurs. Again, this IU team, 5-4 in the Big Ten. They're, 14-6 overall. They've been losing, right? They have that overtime win over Ohio State, but they haven't won in regulation in a while. The loss to Illinois was horrific. The loss to Northwestern last night was very deflating as well. They'll get another chance against Maryland this Sunday on national television. Can they bounce back? Will they bounce back? That is the question that we have to ask. We will talk about that game after it happens. We'll talk about it on Monday morning. This is an opportunity for IU to redeem themselves. Otherwise, this season very well could be falling completely by the wayside as we watch them fall to the NIT and potentially even below that. These are must-win games that this bubble team is going to want to make the tournament. It's a weak season for IU. It's a questionable period of time for this fan base, this coaching staff, this roster. But this game against Maryland is a prime opportunity for redemption. Okay, let's talk about the Colts. Let's preview. First of all, we haven't talked about the Colts in a while. Technically, we talked about them on Tuesday. We talked about them hiring Lou Anarumo as defensive coordinator. And this was supposed to be the first Colts segment from after the break, right? Because we had Notre Dame still playing and we had 3 basketball teams. So that took out all the segments. Now we can talk about the Colts again. And as I said last show, I want to talk about the Colts about once a week moving forward. We're going to preview the 2025 regular season schedule for the Indianapolis Colts. We don't know the schedule. We don't know when these games are happening. But we know who we're playing, and we know where we are playing them, aside from the game in Berlin. That's the only one we're still questioning or we're still unsure about across the board. So where are we at right now, right? The Colts walk away with another disappointing season. They missed the playoffs again. They lost the division again. Round out the season with another middling 8-9 record. How much hope is there for next season is the question, right? And let's find out, right? How much hope is there for next season? There's a lot of factors that go into that, but one of them is the schedule. And one of them is who are the Colts playing? How likely it is that they pick up wins against those teams. Let's break down this schedule, the opponents, the likelihood that the Colts will win each of these games off first glance right now. We still have the draft. We still have free agency. We still have plenty left to go before we get to this point, of course, in the calendar. But let's break down this schedule. The Colts have 6 games against the AFC South. We know that happens every year. They have 3 games against fellow second-place finishers, which is partially unfortunate because the Colts were 8-9, maybe around a third-place team level, but they're going to be playing other second-place teams. So some teams finished second and made the playoffs. Some teams finished third and made the playoffs, right? So it's not a totally fair way of measuring these teams, but it's really the best that these schedule makers can do, and it provides some nuance into the schedule. So the Colts play 3 games against fellow second-place finishers. Colts finish second in the AFC South. They play Atlanta, Pittsburgh, and Miami to fill that void, right? So Atlanta was the team that missed the playoffs. They were right there at the end of the year. They fully could have. Maybe they make the playoffs if they start Penix earlier in the year. Atlanta's a team right there that the Colts will be facing. Pittsburgh did make the playoffs. It didn't do much while they got there, but the Pittsburgh Steelers made the playoffs, and the Dolphins were just on the outside looking in as well in the AFC. So some winnable games there. I think that the Pittsburgh game and the Atlanta game are difficult. The Miami game, I think, is a little bit easier, perhaps. They play Pittsburgh on the road and Atlanta and Miami at home off the top of my head. We'll talk about these games in order here in a second. And then the South is paired with the West. So that totals 8 games where the AFC South will play the AFC West. That's the Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, and Broncos. And they'll play the NFC West. So that's the Cardinals, 49ers, Seahawks, and Rams. The number one thing, if you just look at a graphic, the number one thing is that you notice is just how rigorous this road schedule is going to end up being. We have 3 categories. We have division games, we have long shots, which is really just the Chiefs game, and some swing and pivot games, because some of these road games are against difficult opponents. They're going to be difficult to win, especially on the road, but this is where the Colts can swing their season in their favor or potentially let it completely fall off the rails in this span of 4 games. First of all, they were 1-2 in road division games last season. In my opinion, you have to turn that into 2-1, right? The Jaguars are a mess completely. They've hired a new head coach. They've, I think, just fired the general manager today, if I'm not mistaken, or yesterday rather. But Jacksonville, right? They're a mess. Have to pick up a win on the road against the Jaguars. We know that's largely impossible for the Colts to achieve. Maybe this is finally the year. The Titans. Who are the Titans going to draft, right? They have the number 1 pick. Are they going to keep the number 1 pick? I personally don't think so, but are they going to draft a quarterback? Do they get Cam Ward on this Titans team? Is it Travis Hunter? There's going to be some prolific generational talent that the Colts are going to have to contend with most likely, but that should be a win on the road for the Colts as well. And then the Texans are obviously a tough team, difficult opponent that the Colts lost to twice this past season. Texans are a team that were injured last year, but are potentially rounding into form for next season. Those division games, they were 1-2. I think if they're going to make the playoffs, you have to at least expect that they turn that into a 2-1 mark for this season. They play the Chiefs on the road, which the Chiefs are obviously still playing this season. Maybe they're coming off another Super Bowl when we get to this point in the year. Undoubtedly the toughest game on the schedule at the Chiefs. It's the best team that they're playing against. It's also the team that they're playing on the road. That's a long shot. The Colts beat the Chiefs at home a couple years ago. It was a big deal, massive game, really inspired hope in this franchise. The Chiefs on the road, whenever that game occurs, is going to be massively difficult. Toughest game on the schedule. That's one that if the Colts win, then we're having great signs, but we really just expect to pencil that one in as a loss. Then we've got our swing and pivot games, and this is what I want to spend the most time on because I think they're the most influential or consequential, perhaps. On the road, the Colts will play the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Seattle Seahawks, the LA Chargers, and the LA Rams. This is the first time they'll go to LA twice in the regular season. They'll play both teams, the Chargers and the Rams, while there. These are the more evenly matched tests that will dictate whether or not Indianapolis is viewed as a playoff contender, right? These 4 games. Now, it's unfortunate, and there's more, right? I think the Texans game is in this category, and I think the Falcons game and the Broncos game is in this category, but those are home games, right? There's a lot of swing and pivot games that the Colts are going to play against teams at their level because most of the NFC West, the NFC West was around their level, right? The AFC West was a little bit better, but the NFC West, right? The Rams made the playoffs. We were questioning whether or not they would for most of the year. Seahawks were the main team that was potentially going to prevent them from doing that. Cardinals outside looking in, 49ers outside looking in, way outside looking in. These are teams closer to the Colts level, right? The average of the NFC West, the center of gravity in the NFC West is similar to where the Colts are in terms of quality standpoint as a team. AFC West is a bit better. And then, of course, you have those 3 games against teams that are supposedly at their level being fellow second-place finishers. And AFC South is up for grabs. There's a lot of games that the Colts play with teams at their level. The Steelers, the Seahawks, the Chargers, the Rams, the Falcons, the Broncos, the Dolphins even. Cardinals, 49ers could count too, the Texans. Most of these games are against teams at their level. They have a couple games against objectively bad teams. That's the Raiders, that's the Titans, that's the Jaguars, twice, both for each. And then we have 1 game against a team way above our level, the Chiefs. Most of these games are in the middle. And the best example is these road games, these swing and pivot games on the road. It's going to be difficult. The Colts play the Steelers, the Seahawks, the Chargers, the Rams. All on the road, extremely difficult games, extremely difficult tests. This is the category of the schedule that's the most crucial because if the Colts win 2 of these games, totally could be a playoff team. If they win 3, I think they definitely are. If they win 1 or 0, you're probably on the outside looking in there. So again, the Steelers, playoff team. Seahawks were nearly a playoff team. Chargers and Rams both were. This is a situation where the Colts are going to have to win a couple games against teams better than them on the road if they're going to surpass these teams, at least the ones in the AFC, and qualify for the playoffs. The AFC is very heated. It's very difficult, and there's going to be a lot of close games, in theory, on the schedule of the Colts. They're going to have to win down the stretch. And the Steelers game, great example. Seahawks, Chargers, Rams, all great examples. This swing and pivot game category is what I find to be most consequential and most influential as we roll into next season. And then these home games. Again, you play the teams in your division. They were 2-1 in that category last season. They've got to at least maintain that, in my opinion. Jacksonville, Houston, Tennessee. I think at home, at least go 2-1. Because, again, the Jaguars are a mess. The Titans are rebuilding. The Texans are probably good, and that's the one loss I would allow. But for the most part, 2-1 or 3-0 at home in division games. That's what we're going to need to see for the Colts if they're going to achieve the level of success that we want from them. They've got some routine victories on the schedule. They're most of their opponents that they play that are quote unquote easy, they play at home, right? One of their easier games, the Giants at the end of the year, was on the road. Obviously, that's not the only reason why they lost, but certainly it didn't help. So Vegas, they play the Raiders at home. Arizona comes to them. San Francisco, the Colts catch at home. Miami comes to Indianapolis as well. Who knows what the future of Tyreek Hill is? Who knows what the future of the direction of the San Francisco 49ers is, right? The Cardinals, they should be on the up. They should be improving. Marvin Harrison Jr. coming to Indianapolis. This Raiders game will be a big one as well. At home, they shouldn't have very many issues against these teams. If this is a playoff team, these should be 4 wins across the board. Maybe the Cardinals end up surpassing expectations and end up being a playoff team. Same could be said for the 49ers. Still, I think these are games that it would be important to see them win at home. And then we have some trap games, right? And what I would categorize trap games are as team or games against teams at a similar level to the swing and pivot category on the road. But trap games are at home because you look at home games and you are much quicker to chalk or just to write them off as wins for the most part. They play the Falcons and they play the Broncos at home. These were both playoff teams or at least close, right? Broncos were right there, 7 seed, fringe playoff team, nearly got outpaced by the Bengals, but were able to stave them off at the end of the year there. And then the Falcons were a team that was on the final week playing for an opportunity to make the playoffs as champion of the NFC South. Both of those teams, well, I suppose the Broncos made it, but the Falcons failed. Again, 2 playoff teams, or 2 teams that are at least close in the Falcons and the Broncos. Those are trap game opportunities. You can you can write those off as wins. You shouldn't. Of course, we saw how the Colts game against the Broncos went last year on the road. But this is an opportunity, right, for the Colts to potentially win a couple more key games similar to that swing and pivot category, except these ones are occurring at home. They'll play once in Berlin. So one of these games is happening in Germany. I personally expect it to be the Raiders game because the Raiders are bad, right? They're a lower team, and usually we see some of those lower quality teams play overseas when we get to that point. Jacksonville's known for playing in London. I don't think they'll pull a division game over there anyway. So you look at some of these home games. I think Atlanta's a big one, although that one could be in Germany as well. I think this Raiders game is going to be in Germany. We'll see which one it ends up being, but we're going to lose one of these home games at Lucas Oil. We'll still have 8, but one of these 9 games is going overseas to Germany. We'll see which one of them that is. So then we have a way too early ceiling and floor. And the thing I don't like about ceiling and floors is I know who I am. I know how I am, and I know that it's going to be the widest range possible. And that's kind of exactly what happens. I think the true ceiling is 14-3. That's never going to be realistic ceiling. It's never going to happen. The floor is 5-12. That could happen. And realistically, I think the Colts could be 8-9. They reach 14-3 if they just win all of their games at home. And maybe they lose in Houston, they lose in Kansas City, and one swing game. That's just not going to happen. I think realistically the best they could have is maybe 11-5, which would be a massive improvement. 10-7, 11-6 or 10-7 perhaps. I think that's what we could see for the Colts if they were to win the division or be a quality wildcard team. That's the best they could do realistically. 11-6, 10-7. The floor is 5-12. This could happen if things fall off the rails. I'm seeing the Colts win only one road game because of how tough that schedule is in this scenario. One routine victory, right? One trap game or some combination of the two, and two home division games against some of those lower teams in the Jaguars and the Titans. 5-12 is possible. That could happen. That would be a disaster. That'd be very sad. But in a team that I think is capable of potentially having a double-digit win season next year because of how close they kind of have been, and I know that mindset is dangerous. People always talk about how the Colts are close. We like our guys. Let's just run it back next year and see if we can, make up the difference in the margins and maybe make the playoffs. I don't like that mindset because I disagree with it. But still, the Colts have been close. Potentially a team that, if they see significant improvements, could have a double-digit win season. Realistically, they're going to be 8-9, and I think they'll split across the board. I think they'll drop some games. I think they'll win a couple big ones on the road in that swing and pivot category. We'll see how the draft and free agency impacts these predictions, but right now I think the Colts are going to be punished for running everything back, right? They changed defensive coordinator and changed nothing else, and I think they'll be 8-9, an average team again. And then we're going to have questions about what the future of the franchise is. Maybe that means the end for Steichen, Ballard, Richardson, all of them. It's much easier to get rid of all of them next year because that's another year of failure. And that's another year of Richardson not being truly the guy, another year of Steichen struggling, another year of Ballard struggling, missing the playoffs, not winning the division, something along those lines. Maybe we see some sweeping changes next season. Obviously, we're kind of past the point for that to happen this season. So we're in a position where the Colts, if they elevate to a double-win season, great. If they fall by the wayside and end up 5-12, not great. I think realistically they'll be somewhere in the middle, 8-9, which is almost worse than both options because you don't make the playoffs and you don't have a quality draft pick. And the Colts, again, are stuck in purgatory, picking 14th again, looking forward to next season when really there isn't much hope for change. That's who the Colts are going to play. It's 14 teams at 17 games. It'll be a difficult schedule by all accounts, but a schedule that hopefully the Colts will be able to manage. We'll see how the rest of the offseason goes. We will monitor the Colts throughout the offseason. Again, about once a week, we're going to talk about this team. And we'll have some offseason college football talk as well on the other side of the week. Regardless, stay tuned for more Colts updates, I suppose, as the draft comes up and the free agency comes up. We'll see how the rest of the offseason goes for the Colts. That's all I have for you on that topic, and I hope the Colts can do something better than 8-9 next season. Okay, that's all I have for Indiana. I want to talk about the AFC and NFC Championship games. The NFL playoffs are coming to a close. We have our final games played at home stadiums. We're going to preview and predict both games. I want to start with the NFC Championship game. The Commanders are going to the Eagles at I suppose 3 p.m. Eastern on Fox on Sunday. Commanders at Eagles in the NFC Championship game. Philadelphia won in 2017, but it's been a while since then, right? Eagles fans are kind of over that Super Bowl. They're looking for another one. It's been a while. They got there a couple years ago. They lost to Kansas City 38-35. The Kelsey Bowl, it was an incredible game, but the Eagles, of course, fall short in that one. So it's been a minute. It's been a minute since the Eagles have won a Super Bowl, and maybe it's time for them to deserve another one again. On the flip side, Washington, they're playing with house money. They have nothing to lose. They're just looking to continue the miracle run that they have going. They beat the Buccaneers on a last-minute prayer. They honestly boat raced the Lions on the road, the 1 seed, and now they're here. And you could argue that they had an easy draw in the playoffs because the Buccaneers were a weaker division champion, and then the Lions, of course, were horrifically ravaged by injuries. But the Commanders got here, and they deserve it, absolutely. Any team that gets here deserves it in the NFL. They're now playing the Eagles on the road, and this will be interesting because these two teams split in the regular season. The home team won both times. They played in Washington most recently. The Commanders won 36-33. There's a little bit of controversy around that game. Eagles won at home earlier in the year. That's too far away for us to really count it as a game meaningful to this one in terms of looking at how the teams played and trying to compare it to how they might here. The offense and defense match up in a very specific way, and if you look at this game on a macro scale, you kind of start to see why it would make sense that the Eagles would be able to win at home. Philadelphia on offense is arguably, in this weather, one-dimensional. they're reliant on Saquon. They were reliant on Saquon to stay ahead of the Rams last game. The Rams couldn't move the ball, but the Eagles could, because they could just hand it off to Saquon Barkley and he would barrel through for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yards. And that was more than enough in that weather, knowing how inhibited perhaps the Rams offense was going to be in that cold weather and the snow and those conditions. So they're kind of relying on Saquon, but that's okay because Washington's run defense is a weakness of theirs, right? Washington struggles to stop the run, and the Eagles are one of the best in the league at running the football with Saquon Barkley. So whether or not that means that the Eagles can win a Super Bowl like this with this more one-dimensional offense where Jalen Hurts has been shaky recently and the team as a whole feels like they flow through Saquon Barkley, that'll be how they win a Super Bowl. They'll win it on the ground and with defense. I don't know if they can do that against the Chiefs or the Bills, but certainly they can do it against the Commanders. Because again, the Commanders' run defense is a weakness. And on the flip side, how has Washington been winning games in the playoffs? Well, they've been winning them with Jaden Daniels, right? He had almost 300 yards last week against Detroit. This high-flying offense put up 45 on the number 1 seed in the NFC. So the strength for the Commanders is Jaden Daniels, and there's really no question about that in my opinion. But Philly's secondary is top tier, and they draft Cooper DeJean recently to only make it better. You, of course, have Bradbury back there as well. The Eagles are first in pass yards per play allowed. That means that when Jaden Daniels when any quarterback that's been playing against the Eagles has been throwing the football, they're certainly limited in terms of how many yards they gain on a given play. They're second in pass yards per game allowed, same concept, but over the course of the entire game. Jaden Daniels is going to be tested to a level no team has been able to yet this playoffs, right? Because the Buccaneers secondary, of course, isn't necessarily one of the best in the league. The Lions were horrifically ravaged by injuries, and Jaden Daniels was able to pick apart essentially their second-team secondary. So the Eagles, if you just look at it from this macro scale, how do the Eagles win on offense? They win it on the ground, and that is a weakness for the Commanders. How do the Commanders win on offense? Well, it's with Jaden Daniels, and the Eagles have a secondary that might be capable of keeping him at bay, especially at home. I think the Eagles are going to win. I think they're going to advance to the Super Bowl. It's way more complicated than I'm making it. I absolutely understand that, but just on a macro scale, knowing that the Commanders are playing with house money, the Eagles are hungry for another Super Bowl victory. Saquon Barkley hungry for a Super Bowl victory at all. He's been stuck on the Giants. He's finally on a good team, and now he's really elevating that team. Because, again, the Eagles, maybe they don't win that game last week. Tough weather conditions. The Rams couldn't move the ball, but Saquon could, and therefore the Eagles could. We'll see if he can continue to carry this team into a Super Bowl opportunity. I think they will. I think the Eagles win at home and advance to the Super Bowl. Now, later that day, 6:30, CBS, same slot as usual, this AFC Championship game between the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. It's going to be yet another classic. This has been the best matchup in the playoffs year after year. Kansas City searching to three-peat, and Buffalo is trying to capitalize on a waning Super Bowl window. Now, I hesitate to call their Super Bowl window waning at this point. Really, we thought last year was their last run, and they lost to the Chiefs in the divisional rounds, and it was very sad. It was a great game to watch, fantastic watch, but very sad. The Bills lose, and the reason why that was so consequential is that eventually now Josh Allen's rookie deal is up. They're going to have to pay him a ton of money. They had to pay a lot of guys a lot of money. They didn't have the wherewithal to keep all of them, and that's where you see Stephon Diggs leave, right? That's where you see some other aspects of this team leave, and the Bills really didn't quite, they've struggled to stop the run this season because of losing some of those pieces. They don't quite have the receiver talent that they used to. Khalil Shakir has been doing a great job. Keon Coleman, as a rookie, has been proving his worth as well. The Bills drafted well, they reloaded well, and they put themselves in a position to win another Super Bowl, or win a Super Bowl, and potentially have a chance to win a Super Bowl again this season. We'll see how long that lasts. Their Super Bowl window was absolutely waning last season. They've preserved it. You got to win it now because it may not ever get easier than, or not that it's ever easy, but it may only get more difficult from this point forward. Buffalo hasn't been able to get past Kansas City at all in the playoffs in this Josh Allen era. They've never beat him in the playoffs, right, in a meaningful game there. So the Chiefs, they don't go to the Super Bowl every year, but it certainly feels like they're pretty close, and it's because they are, and the Bills are one of those teams that's been the closest to contending with them, and time after time the Chiefs prevail in the postseason. And the narrative for this game is going to be the same as it has been for years, and that's the quarterback duel, right? The quarterback battle, these two wizards casting their spells across the field at one another. It's Patrick Mahomes and his magic, especially in close games, especially this season in close games, versus Josh Allen during an MVP caliber season, right? This game more than likely will be close at the end. It'll be one possession in the fourth quarter, and we know how many one-possession games the Chiefs have won throughout the year, and part of that is because of how well Patrick Mahomes has been able to circumvent some of those high-pressure situations. Now, on the flip side, Josh Allen is probably going to win the MVP now that he beat Lamar Jackson straight up in that game last week. MVP caliber season for Josh Allen. Patrick Mahomes has been excelling in close games and obviously is one of the better quarterbacks, one of the best quarterbacks in the league and maybe of all time. The most prominent subplot to me is obviously the quarterback duel, but more specifically and even more under the surface than that is key down situations, right? Third down and in the red zone, those are the downs that are going to matter the most. And I think if you tally up the percentages and you say in this game which team was more effective on third down, if there's a significant difference, then the team that was better on third down is going to win this game. And I think it's going to be the same for downs occurring inside the 20s. Buffalo is top 10 in conversion percentage on third and fourth downs, but they're 28th in third down defense. So the Bills, again, top 10 in converting on third and fourth down, but one of the worst in the league in defending the sticks in those moments. The Chiefs, top 5 in conversion percentage on third and fourth downs. They do a great job as well. We see that every single year, every single week. It feels like where you finally put the Chiefs on third down, 3rd and 3, and frustratingly, Patrick Mahomes and this offense figures out a way to get past the yellow line again. So the Chiefs and Bills, both in the upper echelon of the league in terms of converting on third and fourth downs. The Chiefs are 29th in third down defense. The Bills are 28th. So both of these teams, effective on third down on offense, but very ineffective on third down on defense. So the question is going to be which team, and primarily quarterback, is going to have the most success in those situations. And really this falls on the defense. This will probably be a high-scoring game just because of those two stats in and of themselves, and both of these offenses are capable of really turning the lights on and scoring. So if both teams are going to score, then the question is, which team and primarily quarterback is going to be able to have the most success on third down, and which defense is going to be able to limit the opposing quarterback the best on third and fourth down? In my opinion, Mahomes improvises better. I think Mahomes, and we know this, and both quarterbacks are great at just about every category of their position, but I think Mahomes improvises better on these third down and fourth down, especially in short situations. I think he's going to do better on his fourth and fifth read. What I mean by that is if Mahomes is on a 3rd and 7 and his first receiver is covered and his second receiver is covered and his third receiver is covered and his check down is covered and he's got to run it himself or maybe flip it somewhere, I think he's going to be better in those situations. I think he improvises better. I think he's a better playmaker on 3rd and 2 or 4th and 1, right? Whether he's going inside or inside or outside of the football, whether he's keeping himself or giving it away. And I just think Mahomes improvises better. I think he's going to be more effective on those 3rd and 4th down situations. And I think that's why he has been winning in part, and that's why I think he will win again. And unfortunately, it breaks my heart. Of course, I'm cheering for the Bills in this game. Unfortunately, that I think is going to be what is going to happen. I think that's going to be the difference in the game is the Chiefs are going to convert more on 3rd and 4th down. The Bills are going to lose some more possessions, settle for more field goals, and the Chiefs are just going to barely outpace the Bills in what could be a high-scoring, high-flying, fantastic, fun-to-watch football game in the AFC Championship. Once again, I think the Chiefs win. I think they advance to yet another Super Bowl. I think they put themselves in position to three-peat. We'll have another rematch of Chiefs-Eagles. It'll be fun. It'll be interesting. It'll be thrilling. Maybe the Chiefs end up winning it again. I think they certainly put them, I shouldn't say certainly, but I think that they'll put themselves in position to win this one. The Bills' defense is just really going to have to contain Mahomes on 3rd and 4th down. Obviously, that's impossible to contain him across the board, but it's on those plays, in those downs, on those situations where we're really going to have to see some success from Buffalo. I think Mahomes is just going to be able to circumvent that as he has all year. He's been winning close games. People call him lucky. I think the Chiefs are good in close game situations, as much as I hate to say it. And I think the Chiefs are going to win this game in the end, in part because of that. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. We really went over a lot. Later today, it's now 7:22 a.m. on Thursday. What day is it? January 23rd. The Pacers play the Spurs today. They'll play again later this weekend. Purdue plays on Friday. IU plays on Sunday. That's really all the games that we have from these teams that we at least frequently talk about on this show. We'll recap all of those. The weekend of basketball on Monday, and then we'll preview a big-time weekend coming up. We've got Purdue IU on Friday on the 31st. We've got some more big-time games from the Pacers. We've got a lot to talk about moving forward. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Early Bird Podcast, and I will see you all next week.